he wasn't supposed to be remembered. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old metal, the kind of scent that clung to places where time had already made its decision, where names faded faster than footsteps, and where loyalty, once honored, now waited quietly behind chain-link doors. A row of retired K9s lay in silence, their bodies still, their eyes half open, not in fear, but in something heavier, something closer to understanding. They had served. They had obeyed. And now, they waited. Not for commands. Not for praise. Just for whatever came next. Outside, the late afternoon light filtered through dusty windows, casting long, tired shadows across the concrete floor. Somewhere in the distance, a metal gate creaked, slow and reluctant, like it had opened too many times for reasons no one wanted to remember. Inside the last kennel, a German shepherd lay curled against the corner, his coat dulled by time, but still carrying traces of what he once was: strong, alert, unbreakable. His name had once been Rex. Now, it was just a number on a clipboard. He didn't lift his head when footsteps echoed down the corridor. Most of them never did anymore, because footsteps meant nothing unless they stopped. And they rarely stopped. The air shifted slightly as the door at the far end opened, letting in a thin line of golden light that didn't belong in a place like this. It stretched across the floor, inching forward, hesitant, as if even light wasn't sure it should enter. Then came the sound. Boots, steady, measured, not rushed, not uncertain. Different. The man who walked in didn't speak right away. He paused just inside the doorway, letting his eyes adjust, letting the silence settle around him like something sacred. Officer Daniel Hayes stood there for a moment longer than most would. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence carried the quiet weight of someone who had seen too much and learned not to explain it. His skin, pale under the fading light, bore the faint lines of years spent under sun and pressure, but it was his eyes that lingered, gray, steady, searching not for perfection, but for something still breathing beneath the surface. He moved forward slowly, each step deliberate, as if he understood that this place didn't respond well to sudden movements or empty promises. The kennels lined both sides of the corridor, each one holding a story that no longer had a voice. A retired narcotics dog with a limp that never healed right. A patrol K9 whose hearing had faded into silence. A bomb detection dog who once saved lives without ever knowing it. Now they lay there, not broken, just finished, at least in the eyes of the world. Daniel stopped halfway down the row. One of the dogs lifted its head slightly, just enough to acknowledge that someone was there. Not hope, just awareness. He didn't reach out. Not yet. Instead, he let his gaze travel, one kennel to the next, until it landed on the last one. Rex. The German shepherd didn't move, but his eyes shifted, just slightly, catching the edge of Daniel's silhouette. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't fear. It was something quieter. Recognition, maybe. Not of the man, but of the weight he carried. Daniel exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible, but enough to break the stillness between them. For a moment, neither moved. Two beings, separated by steel and circumstance, both carrying histories that didn't fit into neat explanations. Then Daniel took one more step forward, stopping directly in front of the kennel. The light from behind him framed his outline, casting Rex's shadow long against the concrete wall. And in that quiet, suspended second, something shifted, not in the room, not in the air, but in the space between them. Because for the first time in a long while, the footsteps hadn't passed by. They had stopped. The man at the front desk cleared his throat, the sound soft but out of place against the weight of the silence that filled the corridor behind Daniel. Papers shifted, a pen tapped once against a clipboard, then stopped, as if even small noises felt disrespectful here. "You here for a specific dog?" the attendant asked, his voice measured, careful not to carry too far. Daniel did not turn immediately. His eyes remained on Rex, who had not moved, not even a flicker beyond the slow rise and fall of his breathing. After a moment, Daniel stepped back from the kennel, not breaking eye contact until the distance forced it. Then he turned, walking toward the desk with the same steady pace, each step quiet but certain. Up close, the attendant looked older than his voice suggested, lines etched deep from years of watching the same pattern repeat itself. Dogs brought in with purpose. Dogs leaving with purpose. And then, eventually, dogs staying behind when purpose no longer had a place for them. He held out the clipboard without a word, a silent routine he had performed countless times. Name, address, intended adoption, he said, almost automatically. Daniel took the clipboard, glanced down at the rows of empty lines, then looked back up. How many are here? He asked. The attendant hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. 12, he replied. All retired. Most of them have medical needs. Some will not adjust easily. He paused, studying Daniel's face, searching for the moment when reality usually settled in and changed a person's mind. It did not come. Daniel nodded once, slow, as if confirming something he had already decided long before he walked through that door. Good, he said quietly. The attendant frowned slightly. Good. Daniel set the clipboard down on the counter, untouched. I will take all of them. The words did not rise. They did not demand attention. They simply landed, steady and immovable, like something that had found its place. For a moment, no one spoke. The faint hum of overhead lights filled the gap, a low, constant sound that seemed louder now only because everything else had gone still. The attendant blinked, then gave a short, uncertain laugh, the kind people use when they assume they have misheard something. I am sorry, he said, shaking his head lightly. All of them. Daniel did not repeat himself. He just nodded again, the same calm certainty in his expression, the kind that did not argue, did not explain, and did not leave room for negotiation. The attendant's eyes drifted past him, down the corridor, toward the line of kennels. You understand what you are saying, right? He asked, his voice lower now, more serious. These dogs are not pets in the way most people expect. They have histories. They have habits. Some of them do not trust easily anymore. Daniel's gaze followed his, returning to the quiet shapes behind the metal doors. I know, he said. The attendant studied him for a long second, then another, searching for doubt, for hesitation, for anything that might suggest this was impulse rather than intention. There was none, just that same steady presence, the kind that did not come from ignorance, but from having already counted the cost. That is a lot of responsibility, the attendant added, softer now, almost as if he were offering Daniel a way out. Daniel rested one hand lightly on the edge of the counter, his fingers still, his posture relaxed but grounded. So was asking them to serve, he replied. The words were not sharp. They carried no accusation, but they settled into the room with a weight that shifted something, subtle but undeniable. The attendant looked down at the clipboard again, then back at Daniel. This time, he did not argue. He reached for a different set of papers, thicker, more detailed, the kind reserved for cases that did not happen often. There are procedures, he said, more to himself than to Daniel. Evaluations. Transfers. It will take time. Daniel gave a small nod. I am not in a hurry. Behind him, down the corridor, a faint movement stirred. Rex had lifted his head just slightly, enough for the light to catch his eyes more fully now. He was watching, not with expectation, not with hope, but with something quieter, something that had not yet decided whether it was allowed to believe. And for the first time in a long while, the room did not feel like a place where endings were scheduled. It felt like something else was beginning, though no one had said it out loud yet. The paperwork took longer than expected, not because of the forms themselves, but because each page carried a quiet reminder of what these dogs had once been and what the world had decided they were now. The attendant moved slowly, pulling files from a worn cabinet behind the desk, each folder labeled with a name that had not been spoken in months, sometimes years. He laid them out one by one across the counter, the soft shuffle of paper filling the room in a steady rhythm. You should know their histories, he said, sliding the first file toward Daniel. It matters. Daniel opened it without hesitation. Inside, there was a photograph clipped to the top corner. A younger German shepherd, posture sharp, eyes alert, standing beside an officer in uniform. The dog's name was printed beneath the image in clean, official type. Milo. Below that, lines of service records, commendations, deployments, details written in a language that reduced instinct and loyalty into checkboxes and dates. Daniel's thumb rested lightly on the edge of the page, tracing nothing, just holding it steady. He turned to the next file. Another photograph. Another dog. Another life lived in service, now condensed into a summary. As he moved through them, something in his expression shifted, not outwardly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but inside, where memories do not ask permission before returning. A faint echo of sunlight on desert sand. The distant hum of radios. The steady presence of a dog at his side, always one step ahead, always watching what he could not see. He closed the file slowly. "How long have they been here?" he asked. The attendant leaned back slightly, arms crossing without tension, just habit. "Some a few weeks." "Some longer," he replied. "People come in, ask about them, then they read the notes. Medical costs, behavioral adjustments. It scares them off." He paused, then added more quietly, "They want something easy." "These dogs are not easy." Daniel nodded once, as if that answer confirmed something he already understood. "They were never meant to be," he said. The attendant did not respond to that. Instead, he reached for another folder, hesitating just briefly before handing it over. "That one," he said, nodding toward the corridor, "is different." Daniel did not need to ask which one. He opened the file and saw the name immediately. Rex. The photograph was older than the others, edges slightly worn. Rex stood beside a patrol vehicle, his stance steady, his gaze focused somewhere beyond the frame, as if even then he had been watching something others could not see. Shorter, fewer lines, but heavier. High sensitivity detection. Exceptional response record. Partner retired due to injury. Dog reassigned. Then, eventually, retired. No additional remarks. Daniel read the last line twice, not because it was unclear, but because of what it did not say. He closed the folder gently and looked back down the corridor. Rex had shifted now, no longer fully curled, his head lifted higher, ears not fully alert, but no longer flat. He was watching, still not approaching, still not asking, just present. Daniel stepped away from the counter, leaving the files behind as he walked back toward the kennels. The attendant did not stop him this time. He simply watched, the pen in his hand now still, as if he understood that whatever was happening could not be guided by procedure alone. The corridor felt different now. Not warmer, not brighter, but less final. Daniel stopped again in front of Rex's kennel, this time closer than before, close enough that the faint sound of Rex's breathing could be heard beneath the hum of the lights. For a moment, neither moved. Then Daniel did something small, almost unnoticeable. He lowered himself slowly, not kneeling fully, but enough to bring his eyes closer to Rex's level, reducing the distance that had defined every other interaction Rex had known in this place. His hand rested loosely against his knee, open, not reaching, not demanding. Just there. Rex's gaze flickered, shifting from Daniel's face to his hand, then back again. Even, as if he understood that trust was not something you called forward, it was something you allowed to come to you. Rex's ears twitched once, catching a sound that did not belong to the room, something deeper, older than the hum of fluorescent lights or the faint shuffle of paper behind them. It was not a noise in the air. It was a memory, a different place, a different time, heat rising from sun-baked asphalt, the distant rhythm of boots moving in sync, a voice, calm and firm, giving commands that were never shouted, only trusted. Rex's body did not relax, but it shifted, subtle changes in tension that only someone paying close attention would notice. Daniel did. He had seen it before, in other dogs, in other moments when the past and present overlapped just enough to make something stir beneath the surface. He did not move closer. He did not speak. Instead, he let the silence hold, because sometimes silence carried more understanding than words ever could. Behind him, the attendant stepped quietly into the corridor, stopping a few feet back, careful not to interrupt whatever was unfolding. He watched with a kind of quiet curiosity, arms resting loosely at his sides now. No clipboard, no pen, just observation. "He does not usually do that," he said softly, more to the air than to Daniel. Daniel did not look back. "Do what?" he asked. The attendant tilted his head slightly toward Rex. "Stay present," he replied. "Most of them shut down after a while. It is easier that way." Daniel nodded faintly, his eyes still on Rex. "He is not shutting down," he said. It was not a guess. It was recognition. Rex shifted again, this time pushing himself slowly into a sitting position. The movement was controlled, deliberate, not rushed, as if every muscle remembered discipline even when the world no longer required it. His gaze stayed locked on Daniel, steady now, no longer drifting. There was something different in it, something that had not been there before. Not trust. Not yet. But attention. Real attention. Daniel lowered his hand slightly, resting it closer to the ground, palm still open, fingers relaxed. He was not offering it. He was making it available. The kind of gesture that did not demand an answer. Seconds stretched, quiet and patient. Rex's nose lifted slightly, testing the air, catching scent layered with unfamiliar and something else, something faint but not entirely foreign. Not the same, but not entirely different either. Another step forward. Small. Measured. The chain link between them remained, but the space behind it was no longer untouched. The attendant shifted his weight subtly, the floor creaking beneath his boots, and for a brief moment, Rex's ears flicked toward the sound, instinct pulling his attention away. Then, just as quickly, it returned. Back to Daniel. Back to the stillness that did not feel empty anymore. You have worked with them before, the attendant said, quieter now, more certain. It was not a question. Daniel finally glanced back, just for a moment, enough to acknowledge the voice. Something like that, he replied. The attendant studied him, then nodded once, as if that was enough. Because sometimes experience did not need to be explained. It revealed itself in the way a person stood, in the way they waited, in the way they did not rush what could not be rushed. Daniel turned his attention back to Rex. The dog was closer now, just within reach of the chain link, his body still cautious, but no longer withdrawn. His head tilted slightly, not in confusion, but in assessment, as if weighing something that could not be measured in simple terms. Daniel exhaled slowly, the sound soft, grounding, and for the first time, he spoke, his voice low, steady, carrying no command, no expectation. It is all right, he said, not as reassurance, not as instruction, just as truth. Rex did not move immediately, but something in his posture shifted again, a fraction of tension releasing, a line softening where it had once been rigid. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he stepped forward the last inch, close enough that the faint warmth of his breath reached through the metal barrier, meeting the stillness of Daniel's open hand without touching it. Not yet, but closer than before. Close enough to begin. The air between them held steady, fragile in a way that could not be seen, only felt, like the moment before something either breaks or begins to heal. Daniel did not move his hand any closer, and he did not pull it away. He simply let it remain there, open, patient, offering nothing but presence. Rex stood at the edge of that space, his breath slow, controlled, as if each inhale carried a question and each exhale waited for an answer that had not yet been spoken. His nose hovered just inches from the metal, drawing in the scent that reached him, not just the surface of it, but the layers beneath. There was something in it that did not belong to this place. Not the sharp edge of chemicals, not the stillness of waiting. Something older, faint traces of dust and wind, of open ground and long hours, of a world where commands had meaning and silence had purpose. Rex's ears shifted again, not fully forward, not fully back, caught somewhere in between, as if his instincts were listening to something deeper than sound. Daniel's voice had settled into the space, quiet and steady, and though it had said very little, it had not left. That mattered. Rex lowered his head slightly, just enough that the angle changed, just enough that the distance felt different. Then, slowly, carefully, he leaned forward the smallest fraction more until the tip of his nose touched the cold metal between them. The contact was brief, almost testing, as if confirming that what stood on the other side was real, not imagined. Daniel's fingers shifted slightly in response, not reaching, just adjusting, acknowledging the movement without interrupting it. The attendant watched from a distance, his expression no longer uncertain, but thoughtful, as if he was witnessing something he had forgotten was possible. Most people try too hard, he said quietly, his voice barely rising above the hum of the lights. They want it right away. Daniel did not look back. That is why they do not get it, he replied. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of experience, the kind that did not come from theory, but from moments that had already been lived and learned from. Rex's gaze lifted again, meeting Daniel's, holding it for a second longer than before. There was still caution there, still distance, but something else had begun to settle alongside it. Recognition was no longer just a possibility. It was taking shape. Daniel slowly shifted his position, lowering himself a little more until he was nearly level with the ground, his movements deliberate, unthreatening, every motion measured so that nothing felt sudden or forced. His hand moved slightly closer to the barrier now, not crossing it, not pressing against it, just resting where it could be seen, where it could be understood. Rex watched the movement closely, his body still, but alert in a different way now, not defensive, but aware. He stepped forward again, this time without hesitation, closing the remaining space until he stood directly at the barrier, his presence fully there, no longer held back by the invisible line that had kept him distant before. For a moment, he did not move at all. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he lowered his head and pressed it gently against the chain link, not hard, not demanding, just enough to feel something on the other side of it. Daniel's hand lifted then, just slightly, and came to rest against the metal, opposite Rex's head, the barrier still between them, but thinner now, less absolute. Neither of them tried to push through it. They did not need to. The connection was already there, quiet, steady, real in a way that did not require contact to be understood. The attendant exhaled softly, a sound that carried more emotion than he had intended, and he looked down the row of kennels, at the other dogs who had not moved, but who were watching now, their eyes no longer empty, but aware of something shifting in the space around them. If one of them starts to believe, he murmured, almost to himself, the others sometimes follow. Daniel remained still, his focus steady, his presence unchanged. Then we start with one, he said. Rex's eyes did not leave his. And for the first time since Daniel had entered the room, the silence did not feel like an ending. It felt like the first step of something that had been waiting longer than anyone realized. The corridor did not change, not in any visible way, but something beneath its stillness had begun to shift. Like air before a storm that never arrives, but leaves everything altered just the same. Daniel remained where he was for a moment longer, his hand still resting against the cold metal, his eyes steady on Rex, who had not moved away, who had not retreated back into the corner like before. That alone was enough to say something had already begun. Slowly, without breaking that fragile connection, Daniel lowered his hand and rose to his feet, his movements measured, giving space instead of taking it. Rex's head followed the motion slightly, not fully, just enough to track it, to stay aware. That awareness lingered even after Daniel stepped back, even as the distance between them widened again. The attendant approached quietly, stopping beside him, his gaze moving from Daniel to Rex, and then down the line of kennels where other dogs now watched with a different kind of stillness, one that held attention instead of absence. "We can start the release process today," he said, his voice low but more certain now. "Transport will need to be arranged. Medical records transferred. Some of them will need immediate care." Daniel nodded, his eyes still on Rex. "I will take care of it," he replied. The attendant studied him for a moment, then added, "There is a facility about 40 miles out. Quiet land. Some space to run. It is used for rehabilitation cases sometimes. Not many people know about it." Daniel finally looked at him, just briefly, and there was something in that glance that resembled recognition, not of the place, but of the intention behind the suggestion. "That will work," he said. The attendant gave a small nod and turned toward the office, already reaching for the phone, his movements quicker now, purposeful, as if something that had been routine had suddenly become meaningful again. Behind them, the kennels remained closed, but the atmosphere no longer felt sealed. Daniel took a few steps down the corridor, not toward the exit, but toward the other dogs. He stopped at the first kennel, where an older shepherd lay with its head resting low, eyes half-lidded, but watching. Daniel did not kneel this time. He simply stood, letting his presence settle, letting the same quiet patience fill the space. The dog did not move, but it did not turn away either. One by one, he walked past each kennel, not lingering too long, not forcing anything, just allowing himself to be seen, to be known as something different from the pattern they had grown used to. Some dogs remained still. Some shifted slightly. One lifted its head just enough to follow him as he passed. Small things. Almost nothing, but not nothing. When he reached the end of the row, he stopped again. Rex was still there, still standing near the barrier, still watching. The distance between them had returned, but it no longer felt the same. It was not empty anymore. It held memory now, fresh and fragile, but present. Daniel exhaled slowly and glanced toward the door at the far end of the corridor, where the last light of the day stretched across the floor in a long, fading line. It would be dark soon. Transitions always happened in that space between light and shadow, where nothing was fully one thing or another yet. He turned back to Rex, his expression unchanged, steady as before, and gave the slightest nod, not as a command, not as a promise, but as acknowledgement. Then he stepped away, not leaving, just preparing. Rex did not follow. He did not move toward the back of the kennel either. He remained where he was, his posture different now, more upright, more present, as if something inside him had shifted just enough to make standing still feel like a choice rather than resignation. Down the corridor, the sound of the attendant's voice carried faintly through the open office door, arranging, confirming, setting things into motion that had been still for far too long. Papers would be signed. Gates would open. Paths would change. But for now, in that quiet stretch of time before anything physically happened, the most important thing had already begun. Not the leaving, not the rescue, but the moment when something that had given up on being chosen started to wonder if it had been wrong. The evening settled in slowly, not with darkness, but with a quiet dimming that softened the edges of everything it touched, turning the sharp lines of metal and concrete into something less rigid, less final. The overhead lights flickered once, then steadied, casting a pale glow that stretched across the corridor like a breath held too long. Daniel stood near the far end now, speaking quietly with the attendant, their voices low and measured, discussing details that belonged to the world outside these walls, transport schedules, medical arrangements, space and time and care. But even as those words moved forward, something else lingered behind, something that could not be written on paper or confirmed with a phone call. Rex remained where he had been, but his posture had changed in a way that could not be undone. He no longer leaned into the corner. He did not curl into himself. He stood, weight balanced, ears shifting with each sound that carried down the corridor, alert in a way that felt familiar, as if something inside him had remembered what it meant to be present. A faint metallic click echoed as the attendant returned, keys in hand, their soft jingle marking the beginning of something that had been delayed for too long. He paused at the first kennel, his movements slower than routine now, more deliberate, as if each action carried weight beyond its function. "We will start with the ones closest to the door," he said quietly, glancing at Daniel. "Easier that way." Daniel nodded, stepping back slightly to give space, his eyes following every motion, not as a supervisor, not as an owner, but as someone witnessing something that mattered. The key slid into the lock with a sound that seemed louder than it should have been. A small turn, a pause. Then the latch released with a soft click that echoed down the corridor like a signal no one had expected to hear again. The gate opened slowly. The dog inside did not rush forward. It did not leap or bark or react the way people often imagined. It simply lifted its head, eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to understand what had changed. The space in front of it was open now. The boundary that had held it in place was no longer there. But freedom, after too much waiting, does not always look like movement. Sometimes, it looks like hesitation. The attendant stepped back, giving the dog room, his posture relaxed, his hands at his sides. "It is all right," he murmured, echoing the same tone Daniel had used before, not commanding, not urging, just offering. The dog shifted forward slightly, one paw extending beyond the threshold, then stopping, as if testing the ground itself. Daniel watched closely, his gaze steady, his presence unchanged. He did not call. He did not gesture. He simply remained. Seconds passed. Then another step. Slow. Careful. The dog crossed the line. Fully now, standing outside the kennel for the first time in longer than anyone there could remember. It did not run. It did not look back. It just stood, breathing in the air that felt different, even if it was the same. Behind it, the open gate remained, silent, waiting. Down the row, other dogs stirred. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just small shifts, heads lifting, eyes focusing, attention turning towards something that had not existed before. Rex watched it all, his gaze steady, his body still, but something in him had begun to follow the movement, not physically, but internally, as if each step taken by another was being measured against something inside himself. The attendant moved to the next kennel, the keys sounding again, softer now, less foreign. Another lock. Another click. Another door opening into possibility. And still, the dogs did not rush. They waited. They watched. They learned. Daniel exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost in the quiet, and took a step closer to the center of the corridor, positioning himself where he could be seen, not as a barrier, not as a guide, but as something constant in a moment that was anything but. Rex shifted again, his weight moving forward just slightly, his attention no longer divided, but focused, not on the doors, not on the movement, but on Daniel. Always back to him, always measuring something that words could not define. And as another gate opened, and another quiet step crossed into a space that had once been closed, the pattern began to change, not loudly, not all at once, but in the only way that mattered. One step, then another, and somewhere in between, something that had been left behind began to move forward again. The corridor no longer sounded the same. The sharp echoes of metal and footsteps had softened into something quieter, something almost unfamiliar, like a place remembering what it used to be before it learned how to hold endings. A few of the dogs now stood outside their kennels, not roaming, not restless, just present, adjusting to a space that had once been closed to them. One remained near the threshold, glancing back at the open gate, as if making sure it had not imagined the change. Another stood still in the center of the aisle, nose lifting slightly, catching scents that had never reached it before, traces of dust, faint air currents, the subtle shift that comes when a place opens instead of confines. Daniel remained where he was, not directing, not calling, simply holding his ground in a way that allowed the moment to unfold without pressure. His presence had become a kind of anchor, something steady in a space that was quietly learning how to move again. The attendant continued down the row, each gate opening with the same measured care, each click softer than the last, as if even the sound itself understood it was no longer marking routine, but release. Rex had not moved from his position, but everything about him was different now. His body no longer carried the weight of stillness. His head was higher, his ears more responsive, his eyes no longer distant but focused, not just observing the others, but watching Daniel with a kind of quiet intensity that had not been there before. It was not dependence. It was not even trust yet. It was something deeper, something that forms when recognition begins to settle into belief. A final gate opened near the end of the corridor, and the last of the dogs stepped out, slower than the others, older perhaps, its movements careful but steady. For a moment, the entire space held still again, not out of emptiness, but because something had completed itself. 12 dogs, 12 stories that had once ended here, now standing together in a place that no longer felt like an ending at all. The attendant stepped back, keys hanging loosely in his hand, his shoulders lowering as if a weight he had carried for years had finally shifted. "That is all of them," he said quietly. Daniel gave a small nod, his gaze moving across the group, not counting, not assessing, just seeing. Each dog stood in its own way, some closer together, some apart, but none of them hidden anymore. The corridor that had once been lined with closed doors now held open space, and in that space, something fragile but undeniable had taken root. Rex finally moved. It was not sudden. It was not dramatic. Just a step, then another. Slow, deliberate, each movement measured as if he were walking through something unseen, something that needed to be crossed carefully. The distance between him and Daniel shortened inch by inch, the faint sound of his paws against the concrete floor barely audible, but carrying more meaning than anything that had happened before. Daniel did not move toward him. He did not shorten the distance from his side. He allowed it to remain Rex's choice, Rex's decision, Rex's moment. When Rex reached the center of the corridor, he stopped, his body angled slightly, his head tilted just enough to study Daniel from a new position, closer now, but still free to turn away if he chose to. He did not turn away. Instead, he took one more step, then another, until he stood just a few feet away, close enough that the separation between them no longer felt like distance, just space waiting to be crossed. Daniel slowly lowered himself again, the same steady motion as before, bringing himself down to Rex's level, his hand resting lightly against his knee, open but still, never reaching first. Rex's gaze dropped to that hand, then lifted again, meeting Daniel's eyes with a steadiness that had not been possible before. The room held its breath, not in tension, but in quiet anticipation, as if even the air understood that what happened next would not be loud, would not be dramatic, but would matter more than anything that had come before. Rex stepped forward the final inches, closing the space completely, and this time, there was no barrier between them, no chain link, no distance, just presence. He lowered his head slowly, carefully, and rested it, gently, against Daniel's hand. No force, no urgency, just contact. And in that small, silent gesture, something that had once been lost found its way back, not through command, not through expectation, but through the quiet, patient act of being chosen again. The contact did not break. It did not rush forward into something louder or larger. It simply stayed, quiet and steady, like a truth that had finally found where it belonged. Daniel did not close his hand around Rex's head. He did not pull him closer. His fingers remained open, resting gently against the worn fur, allowing the moment to exist without claiming it. Rex did not flinch. He did not pull away. His breathing slowed, the rhythm settling into something deeper, something that no longer carried the tension of waiting. Around them, the other dogs stood in silence, but it was no longer the silence of absence. It was the silence of witnessing. One by one, they shifted, small movements that echoed the same quiet change, a step closer to the center, a lifted head, a body no longer pressed into corners. The attendant watched from the edge of the corridor, his expression softer now, the lines of routine replaced by something closer to relief. He had seen many dogs pass through these doors. He had watched them arrive with purpose and leave without it. But this was different. This was not departure. This was return. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing just slightly, as if something he had been carrying without noticing had finally been set down. He looked at Rex, really looked this time, not just at what he was now, but at what still remained beneath it. The structure, the discipline, the quiet intelligence that had not disappeared, only been waiting for a reason to surface again. "You are still here," he said softly, not as a question, not as a surprise, but as acknowledgement. Rex's ears shifted at the sound, his head pressing just a fraction more into Daniel's hand, not demanding, not needing, just accepting. The corridor held that moment, stretching it just long enough to matter, just long enough to settle into something that would not be forgotten. Then, slowly, Daniel moved. Not away, not abruptly, just enough to change the shape of the moment without ending it. He rose to his feet, his hand lifting gently from Rex's head, leaving behind the warmth of contact but not the connection itself. Rex remained where he was for a second, then another, as if feeling the absence, not as loss, but as something that could be followed. And he did follow. One step, then another, not rushed, not uncertain, simply choosing to move in the same direction. The other dogs began to shift as well, subtle at first, then more certain, forming a quiet alignment that had nothing to do with command and everything to do with trust. No leashes, no orders, just presence guiding presence. The attendant stepped forward, opening the main door at the end of the corridor. Cool evening air slipped inside, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and distance, of space that had no walls, no ceilings, no boundaries drawn in metal. The light outside had faded into a soft blue-gray, the kind that comes just before night fully settles, when the world feels suspended between what was and what will be. Daniel walked toward the open door, not looking back, but aware, always aware, of the quiet footsteps behind him. Rex stayed close now, not pressed against him, not dependent, but aligned, his pace matching without effort, as if it had always been that way. The others followed in their own time, their own rhythm, but they followed. When Daniel stepped outside, the air changed completely. It carried openness, possibility, something the corridor had not held. He paused just beyond the threshold, giving the dogs space to cross it in their own way, to feel the difference for themselves. Rex was the first to reach him. He stopped just beside Daniel, his gaze lifting briefly toward the horizon, then back to the man at his side. No words passed between them. None were needed. Behind them, the last of the dogs stepped through the doorway, the sound of their movement soft against the ground, but steady, undeniable. The attendant remained inside, watching from the doorway, his hand resting against the frame, not stopping them, not calling them back, just witnessing the moment when something he had guarded for so long finally left, not lost, but found. Daniel took one more step forward into the open space, and this time, Rex did not hesitate. He moved with him, not because he was told to, not because he had to, but because he chose to. And sometimes, that was the only kind of loyalty that truly remained.